Welcome to the study of Esther. Esther is about the exiled people of Yahweh, how they must remain faithful to Him so that He may preserve and prosper them. The biblical account gives no indication who wrote the book of Esther. The writer was probably an eyewitness, as evidenced by the detailed description of many of the events. The author was well acquainted with Persian customs as well as Jewish culture. Some have suggested that Ezra or Nehemiah wrote the book, but this is conjecture. Esther and Mordecai were probably sources, since only an eyewitness could have provided many of the details, such as the personal communication between Esther and Mordecai. This book was probably written in the latter years of Ahasuerus' reign, 470 to 465 BC, or at the beginning of the reign of his son Artaxerxes, 464 to 424 BC. Esther chapter 10, verses 2 and 3 indicate that the book closes with the end of Ahasuerus' reign, so a date of 465 BC is appropriate. The events of the book occurred over a 10-year period from 483 to 473 BC, during the reign of Ahasuerus, and closes with a reference to his reign in the past tense. This is a period of Persian domination, international domination, when many Jews had returned from exile to rebuild Jerusalem and the temple precinct in response to the decree of Cyrus and the prophetic exhortations of men like Jeremiah, Isaiah, Daniel. Mordecai and Esther and others remained behind in Persia, which providentially provided the Jews the opportunity to take vengeance on their enemies throughout the empire. The book opens with a reference to the 3rd year of the reign of King Ahasuerus, who ruled from India to Ethiopia over 127 provinces. The king is giving a massive banquet for all of his leaders. This may have been the great feast that he gave while he was planning the invasion and destruction of Greece. Herodotus, a Greek historian, records that it took him more than 4 years to prepare his military for the invasion. He began his attack in 481 BC, which was designed to avenge the defeat of his father Xerxes by the Greeks at the Battle of Marathon. Ahasuerus had an initial victory at Thermopylae, as his naval forces were able to defeat the Greeks. The tide turned in 2 great battles, at Salamis in 480 BC and Plataea in 479 BC, where the Greeks crushed his navy and supply lines, sending him fleeing for home. It is at this time that he returns to his palace and probably seeks consolation in his harem. The disobedience of Queen Vashti could not be tolerated in the view of the national defeats, and therefore he sought comfort through the selection of a new queen. It seems that the circulation of the book of Esther would have been wide-ranging, since it includes the edict for Jews to defend themselves, and then the following institution of the Feast of Purim, which became a national feast with international celebration. Both of these events had international impact in the Jewish community. The first recipients would therefore have been Jews living throughout the Persian Empire who had defeated their enemies. This book would have given them the details of God's providential care for His people. The argument of Esther is that the people of Yahweh must remain faithful to Him so that He may preserve and prosper Abraham's seed according to His covenant promises. A major purpose is to encourage faith in Yahweh's covenantal promises by recounting his sovereign and providential protection of his people even under Gentile domination. A key verse is found in Esther chapter 4 and verse 14. It says, "For if you remain silent," this is Mordecai speaking to Esther, "for if you remain silent at this time, relief and deliverance will arise for the Jews from another place, and you and your father's house will perish. And who knows whether you have not attained royalty for such a time as this?" Some of the major themes in the book of Esther are hatred, faithfulness, providential care, the Feast of Purim, the exaltation of the Jews, the principle of the reversal of misfortune to fortune. As we see over and over again in the book of Esther, harm is meant for the Jews, and yet fortune is the result. There's the absence of any mention of God's name, and you will discover additional themes as you read through the book of Esther. An exegetical outline of Esther can be divided into 6 sections. First, in chapters 1 and 2, we have King Ahasuerus chooses Esther to be queen. Second, we see that Haman seeks to destroy Mordecai and the Jews in chapters 3 and 4. Third, we see Queen Esther exposes Haman's plot, and the king hangs him on his own gallows, chapters 5 through 7. Fourth, we have Mordecai and Esther are exalted, and the Jews defeat their enemies, chapters 8 and part of 9. Fifth, we see the Jews celebrate their deliverance and institute the Feast of Purim in the latter part of chapter 9. And sixth, Mordecai achieves great fame in the kingdom because of his loyalty, faithfulness, not just to the earthly king, but to the heavenly king. Now let's put our feet into the sands of time so that we may read or listen to the history of the Lord God's protection of his people while they were under Persian rule. You are living at a time when Jewish communities are enjoying a sense of liberation and freedom. They have been allowed under the edict of Ahasuerus to be able to return vengeance on their enemies who are seeking to kill them. It is a time when they have killed tens of thousands of their enemies throughout the empire. You read so that you can understand the events that led up to this great victory. You want to understand the background of the Feast of Purim, which is now celebrated by Jews in every country. Even though God is not mentioned, you see his providential hand. You see his sovereign protection as he reverses the many evil plans against his people and turns misfortune into fortune for good. You want to be encouraged that God has not forsaken his people, but rather continues to protect and deliver those who trust in him. Even though the name of God is not mentioned, God's providential hand is still protecting the remnant, the faithful, the loyal who seek him.